Well, good afternoon, everybody. For those of you that haven't met me before, my name's Lynn Hay. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Adelaide Business Hub. We're very pleased today to bring you a webinar featuring Premier Stephen Marshall, focusing on the opportunities for South Australian small businesses and also some of the challenges, of course, that we all know that we're facing at the moment. So we'll be looking forward in a short while to an interview with him. I just wanted to begin by thanking you very much for taking the time to register those questions as part of your registration process. Critical thing for us is that we've now gleaned from up to 200 people that did register for this session today, some of the really specific and serious issues that they feel that are important for them at the moment. In terms of Adelaide Business Hub, we've taken that information on board, and really over the last couple of months, we've been working on a rapid response solution and some services to help small business really across the state of South Australia. I just wanted to draw your attention to our website after this webinar, adelaidebusinesshub.com.au. If you go to the COVID-19 business recovery page, you can access that via the homepage. And what we've aimed to do there for you is basically to focus on three key new services. The first one is we've negotiated with the Commonwealth Government to expand our digital solutions program across the state for small business. And it's now including a very targeted business recovery stream as well. So a lot of you really have raised the issue around building up your digital capability in these times, and that program is specifically designed to do that. So in short, for $55, you can attend as many small group workshops as you like, and also benefit from one-on-one mentoring on a topic of your choice with an expert on issues specific for your business. The second thing we've done is to partner with the Western Alliance of Councils. That includes the City of Port Adelaide Enfield, City of Charles Sturt, West Torrens and Holdfast Bay. And what we've done there is that for businesses and residents living, working in the western suburbs of Adelaide, we've set up a free business helpline. So really, via the page I'm talking about, COVID-19 business recovery, all you have to do is to register for a callback, and it's a rapid response service for you on virtually any business issue that's important to you right now. And thirdly, from the issues you've identified, we're continuing to work on a C19 business recovery, like best ever links page. And what we're aiming to do with that is that we don't want you to waste time fishing around for links to information about government grants or JobKeeper or tax issues, you know, leasing, all of those sorts of hot topics at the moment. We've put it all on one page for you with live links everywhere. So we're hoping that that'll speed things up in terms of you getting the information you want. Finally, I'd like to extend our thanks to the City of Port Adelaide Enfield. Mayor Claire Bone will be joining us briefly in a moment, but Port Adelaide Enfield have been huge supporters of us for many, many years. And as a result of their investment in the work we do, we've been able to provide some pretty targeted services, as I've just outlined. And also through our hub at Todd Street, we're providing business accommodation for people, and it's been really interesting to see the response we've had from quite a number of businesses who are looking to, you know, re-engineer their business model and actually consider flexible, shorter-term lease accommodation while they trial new approaches to their business and get the one-on-one help that, you know, we offer here as well. So anyway, that's enough from me for now. Once again, I thank you very much for taking the time to register for the session, and I hope you enjoy it. I'd like to now hand you over to our convener for today, our chair, Christine Peters, who will introduce our mayor and special guest. Thank you.
Hi everyone, thank you so much. This is our annual business lunch, so I hope you've got a lovely glass of wine with you and something yummy for lunch. It's a strange creature running a workshop like this, or a business lunch like this, but it's what we're doing, keeping each other safe, so that's marvellous. What I'd like to do is just give you a bit of an overview of what we're going to be doing today, and then introduce Mayor Bone. So firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the attendance of VIPs, Claire Bone, of course, the Mayor of the City of Port Adelaide Enfield and a great supporter of ours. Helen Wright, also elected member, City of Port Adelaide Enfield, and of course the board of the Adelaide Business Hub, who are a terrific group, who do exactly what a board needs to do, which is to ask the hard questions to make sure we're on track with everything. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce the Mayor Claire Bone from the City of Port Adelaide Enfield. Council is doing some amazing things in terms of the COVID business response, and I'm sure she'll give you some great information about that. Thanks, Claire.
Thanks, Christine, and thank you, Lynn, also for the invitation today to come and speak briefly at the Adelaide Business Hub annual lunch. I would also like to recognise, I believe Councillor Kat Mitchell is part of the group here today as well, so thank you to her for coming along. I think Helen may have been an apology in the end. Yeah, of course, we've all been going through a lot of changes at the moment, and the City of Port Adelaide Enfield is no different to any other, where we've had to think quickly and excuse the planes going overhead. There's not too many of them these days, but one's happening to go by right now. Yeah, all of us having to adjust and do things a little bit differently, but we've also found it a really exciting opportunity to rethink the ways that we do things and the ways that we can support our community and our local business. So I'd like to just talk to you about a few things that we've been doing, and also some of the ways that we're envisioning doing some things into the future, because obviously it's not something that's happening just right now. It's something that we'll be facing for the next few years to come as we recuperate the costs that have been lost across the state and the country. We've had a really strong economy, and before COVID we produced 20% of the state's gross regional product within the City of Port Adelaide Enfield. So we've been really proud of that, of course, having the port, as well as now the defence work that's coming out of our area. There's some really exciting opportunities which we're harnessing. We've also seen firsthand a significant increase in local unemployment and business closures. So we're looking at ways that we might be able to actually contribute to bringing people back into the workforce. We work really closely, as Lynn said, with the Adelaide Business Hub, and we've dedicated that helpline that she mentioned. We've also provided a 100% rent-free period for the 1st of March to the 30th of June for all council-owned and controlled facilities. So that's quite often our sporting facilities, but also we do have some private lessees. We also continue to review this into the future, as we are aware that this might be something that people will be struggling with for a little while to come. We've offered a number of rate relief options for businesses and individuals experiencing financial hardship, and encourage them to come in and actually talk with us through that and look at ways that we might be able to support them, because having the conversation with each individual is an important way of making sure we're targeting that appropriately. We've provided some food safety advice for restaurants and cafes whose trade has been affected by COVID-19 restrictions. And we've also had to change our business models and to support the businesses who are changing their models. And it's been really exciting to see some of them, particularly across Port Adelaide and Semaphore, being our main economic drivers for small businesses, and the ways that they've been able to rethink business and the way they do things, and also how they might be able to continue in some of those changes into the future. We've been waiving the inspection fees, which we of course have to do within the facilities, but we also don't believe that's a cost that the businesses should be having to face at this point in time. And also a Be Kind PAE webpage, so that's connected and promoted new businesses and looking at a way that people can come and actually see the different ways that businesses are doing things. So now we've actually looked at what can we do. We've responded really quickly into this period of COVID, and now how can we actually look to the future as we go into our recovery period. And at the moment we're setting our budget and looking at including a $2.4 million COVID recovery fund. So with that, we still don't know exactly what we're going to do, because we'd like to respond appropriately to the way that the businesses and the community want that to happen. But we've got some ideas about how we can introduce some different ways of doing things as well, looking at the tourism and the environmental attractions, investment opportunities, ways that we can help the shop fronts, in our area rethink the way that they do things into the future as well. So this will be for the next 12 months. And then, as I said, we know that this is something that we'll need to continue to look to into the future. And just coming back to the Adelaide Business Hub and the collaboration that we have with them and the Build Back Better, we just know that nothing's going to go back to normal. What was normal? Do we want it to go back to normal? But maybe we actually want it to build back into a better PAE. And there's some really exciting opportunities we know that we can support with, and we really want to be leaders and be at the forefront there. So yeah, anyone who lives or works or plays in the city of PAE, we want them to be proud of it and to see that we have a new reinvigorated PAE moving forward into the future.
Well, thank you, Claire. I think we've got a couple of minutes before the Premier is due to join us. So what I might do is just give you a bit of an overview of how the rest of the proceedings will play out. We'll welcome the Premier, and he's going to give us a bit of overview of what's happening at the state level for about 10 minutes, and then people who registered, well, of course you've registered, as you registered you were able to submit some questions, and what we've done is pulled those together in summary questions that picks up pretty well everything that people were asking, and the Premier's had a chance to have a look at that and have a think about that, and so we'll be going through some of those questions after his presentation. And very much look forward to that open discussion. And of course, because we've got so many people at the other end, we can't have questions directly, and that's just unfortunately a feature of the online universe we're in right at the moment. But I'm sure it's going to be very interesting anyhow. So I could see, hello, Premier, Christine Peters here. Thank you very much for joining us. I know you've just run in, so appreciate that. Are we pretty well ready to go?
I think I'm on mute.
Not anymore.
No, okay, you've been managing that.
You didn't say anything terrible.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me along. It is true, I've just literally run in here. I've just finished National Cabinet this morning, which is an interesting arrangement, and then I've quickly done a press conference, and I had to say to all of the journalists, look, I've got an important meeting to go to. You're going to have to stop asking questions, because I wanted to come on to this, and I really would like to acknowledge Mayor Claire Bowen from the City of Port Adelaide Enfield, all the elected members who are with us today, and to you, Christine, from the Adelaide Business Hub, thank you very much, and to the whole board of the Adelaide Business Hub, and everybody who's given up their time today to come on to this. And I'd particularly like to acknowledge the partnering with the Port Adelaide Enfield Council, Charles Sturt, West Torrens and Holdfast Bay for their support. And I would also like to just acknowledge that today we are, well, I'm certainly, and most people I think tuned in would be meeting on the traditional lands of the Kaurna people, and that we acknowledge their ongoing spiritual relationship with this precious land. Well, I think I'm speaking for giving a presentation, then answering some questions. So I'm going to just kick off and say what a year 2020 has turned out to be. I thought 2019 and 2018 was tough with dry and drought conditions across most of our state. But the end of 2019 and the beginning of 2020 just really hit our state with very significant bushfires, multiple bushfires, two very large ones, one in the Adelaide Hills and one on Kangaroo Island, which really affected our state and the psyche of our state for the beginning of this year. And soon as soon as they were extinguished, of course, we were right into the middle of a global pandemic. So I'm going to pass a piece of legislation. Nothing else can go wrong for the rest of this decade in South Australia. We've been through it all. But I tell you, it has been, in many ways, a very affirming process on the partnership that we have in South Australia between business, between the people, and between all levels of government, whether that be local government, state government or federal government. We're all in this together. And I think, quite frankly, Australia can take the gold medal in terms of dealing with 2020 so far. And in particular, I'm very proud of every person in South Australia. COVID-19 has had devastating effects on businesses, on individuals, and of course on all levels of government in terms of increased expenditure and reductions in revenue. But we can only really play with the cards that we are dealt, and we've got to make the best of this pretty tough situation. And I presume that has lots of effects for the members of the Adelaide Business Hub. What we've tried to do is to work with the federal government. As I was saying before, we've established National Cabinet, which is made up of the 6 premiers, the 2 chief ministers and the Prime Minister. I think today's meeting was meeting 23 or 24 since we began at the end of March. So it's about a decade or 2 of COAG meetings where we all come together. And although we haven't all agreed on every single issue, we do respect each other's jurisdiction, the issues that affect each of those jurisdictions, and we have come together on lots of ways that we can work together on 2 critical areas. The first is the health consequences of a global pandemic. The second, of course, is the economic crisis and the economic implications of this COVID-19 epidemic. The federal government moved very quickly with stimulus and support, and in particular with the JobKeeper program. It's probably easy to be critical this far down the track of how we could have maybe nuanced it slightly, but it had to be put together in rapid time, if you like, to put a support underneath the Australian economy during this global pandemic. It's not perfect, but I've got to say there are very few countries that could even contemplate a wage subsidy arrangement like JobKeeper. Most countries around the world have been on the back foot just trying to cope with that immediate health requirement. Australia has not only fully resourced the health response, but also this support underneath the economy with JobKeeper, the new job seeker arrangements, the home builder arrangements, the art sector package which has been announced, and plenty of other smaller items that perhaps many people have even forgotten about this far down the track. One of the things that we're really keen to do at the National Cabinet level is to look at what happens post the end of September when JobKeeper and job seeker arrangements come to an end. The Prime Minister is committed to making sure that there is some continuity post the end of September, especially to support those sectors which are most adversely affected by the coronavirus. We've had, I think, a mixed bag in terms of evaluation around the world. The IMF came out earlier this week. We are one of only 2 countries in the world where they're giving, if you like, a revised deterioration, which, if you like, improves our rating as a nation. It's a funny way I just put it there, but there's only 2 nations in the world where they're saying things are looking better than they were before, and the vast majority of other countries looking significantly worse. The IMF is now saying that the Australian economy is likely to contract this calendar year by around 4.5%. And unfortunately, that's the good news. Many other countries now, most developed countries, the IMF is talking about a deterioration or a contraction of 10 to 15% this calendar year. So we are in a good or better position than many other economies. The ANZ on Friday last week said that they had revised their earlier contraction down to just 2%. So there is some variability. But what we do know, even though this is much better than many people were contemplating 2, 3, 4 months ago, it is still a massive burden on business. It's still a massive burden on families, and it's still a massive burden on economies like South Australia's and the national economy. At the state level, we've moved very quickly. We were the first jurisdiction with our first stimulus package, $350 million, and the first jurisdiction to announce a second stimulus package, which now takes it up to more than $1 billion, in fact $2 billion if we look at some of the deferrals and the other stimulus measures that we've been able to put in place with bringing different programs forward. Nevertheless, we still have in excess of 50,000 people now who are unemployed due to the coronavirus. Although recently we've seen the increased number of people stabilising, so the number of people that are accessing JobSeeker at the federal level is now stabilising and slightly diminishing, we have got this large number of people that we've got to get back to work as quickly as possible. And that's why I've been very keen, despite lots of noise about not opening up borders and not reducing restrictions, I've been very keen to recognise that we've got to have a balance. So when we make decisions like this, we've got to look at the health implications, but also the social and the economic. And when we put those things together, I think we've got a very balanced situation. As you may be aware, as of Monday next week, we move into what we're calling stage 3. And stage 3 removes another very significant level of restrictions right across different sectors in South Australia. And the principal restriction going forward is essentially now going to be 1 person per 2 square metres. So in the earlier tranches, it was 1 person per 4 square metres with very significant caps on certain sectors or certain activities. In stage 3, we essentially move to 1 person per 2 square metres. And if people don't use that in their environment, it would be essentially 50% capacity. So, for example, in a theatre, we will be lifting the restriction that was previously in place, which didn't allow them to operate. Now we move to a 50% capacity for theatres in South Australia, cinemas in South Australia. Now, of course, they still need to download and fill out their COVID safe app, or COVID safe plan, and those are being put in place. We've already had that in stage 2, so people are now really working out what they need to do. The police have been fantastic in terms of not only educating people about what the new restrictions are, but going out and doing site inspections, and when something is clearly wrong, not fining them immediately, but providing them with a warning, providing them with an opportunity to better understand their obligations and improve from there. We also now, I think, shovelled out, much to Rob Lucas's absolute dismay, I think now about $180 million in small business grants, $10,000 grants. So that money has gone out in recent weeks. Well, in fact, since the beginning of, I think about the beginning of May, or certainly the early part of May, where we've been putting that money out. And that's just provided a little bit of relief to small businesses in South Australia. We know that small businesses rely on cash. They rely on the cash coming in 1 week to pay the accounts that they incurred in the previous weeks. And so having this in, I know, has kept many businesses afloat during these pretty difficult periods. We've already announced 2 waves of support, tranche 1, tranche 2, and we're now working on further stimulus and support that we're really going to need in South Australia to make sure that we can stand up as many businesses, getting them back to operating as quickly as possible, but most importantly, getting as many people back to employment as quickly as possible. So these are some of the areas that we're focused on. So look, I hope that provides a bit of an overview of where we're at the moment. And I've got a couple of questions, but I don't know whether, Christine, I'm passing back to you before I move on to questions. I heard you when I came on saying, I've had these questions and I'm all prepared for them. Well, I've got to say, I'm not as prepared as you think I am. So,
so this is it, folks. The Premier wing it. So let's see how we go. Look, I'd like to also endorse, as a small business owner myself, apart from the being chair of the Adelaide Business Hub, the state government's stimulus packages have made an enormous difference. And certainly talking to my colleagues and peers around the place, they would agree. And I'd also like to say that we've got people from all over South Australia joining us today, which is fantastic. The Adelaide Business Hub's Digital Solutions program is running out across every region, and of course people from all over the state are joining us, which is also an opportunity we don't get if we hold a formal luncheon. So here we go. From the point of view of the questions, what do you think the biggest challenge for government and business going forward right at the moment?
I think the biggest issue is confidence, to be quite honest with you. I mean, we find ourselves in the most enviable position in the world. And in fact, at National Cabinet today, Dr. Stephen Kennedy presented. Now, Stephen Kennedy is the Treasury Secretary. We often have Philip Lowe, Dr. Philip Lowe, who's the Governor of the Reserve Bank of Australia, or Wayne Byers, who's the head of APRA in Australia. And all of them are pretty consistent. We can do what we can in terms of the health response. We can do what we can in terms of removing the restrictions. But the single biggest issue is really about business confidence, consumer confidence, and investor confidence. And that's why I go to great lengths to tell people to be positive about the future. If people are feeling more positive, they're more likely to invest, they're more likely to employ people, they're more likely to spend money in the economy. And sometimes you can talk yourself into oblivion. And I think this is something we've got to be really careful about, because we are in this extraordinary bubble in Australia, and potentially Australia and New Zealand. And the world has changed. There is no doubt about that. We're trying to normalise export freight markets. We're trying to do what we can to bring our international students back in a safe way with 14 days of careful supervised quarantine. But the days of us flying overseas for business or for leisure, I think they're going to be on the back burner for quite some time, to be quite honest with you. So I think we've got to make the best of the situation. Now, there are some advantages with what we've got, because in many ways, having open international borders actually created a leakage out of South Australia, a leakage of people travelling overseas for their holidays. Well, at the moment, many people are spending money here in South Australia, which is absolutely great. I try to get away to the country every single week. That's been difficult so far this year, but I've certainly been away the last 4 weeks visiting different parts of regional South Australia. And many of them have said they've never had such bookings in the middle of the year. So there is a sort of a slightly silver lining to an otherwise dark cloud. But if I could make one plea to the people in the business community, and that is be confident. There are a lot of things that are the fundamentals, if you like, that are right here in Australia at the moment. Our banking system isn't in peril like it is in other parts of the world. Our capital markets have now stabilised. We no longer have the Reserve Bank buying bonds, because international markets are operating and people are wanting to invest in Australia, because we have done such a good job with the health response. I think that the building stimulus package the federal government has put in place is a really good approach. It is providing that incentive. We've had feedback already from the builders in South Australia that this will create jobs, and the construction sector is a big employer. So in many ways, if construction is doing well, it's great for those sectors, but it also is great for the overall economy, because there's more money going into tradies' pockets, and then they're going out and spending them in other sectors as well. So confidence would be my answer to that question.
Thank you. And certainly that's something that we have control over, which is really good. I think you probably partly answered the next question around the sectors that have a positive trend and a negative trend. Any further thoughts on that in terms of perhaps some sectors that we need to rethink the business models, look at the customer base, look at how people are actually managing those particular sectors?
A really good question. We do have more and more information now about the effects by sector, whether it be construction, whether it be medical sector, whether it be the health sector more broadly. What we do know, and I've only just come from the update, but the 2 sectors which stand out as being the hardest hit basically the tourism and hospitality sector with about a 31% contraction in employment, and the other one, the arts and recreation sector. So tourism, hospitality, retail, hard hit, 31% contraction, and the arts and recreation sector hit by 35%. We also know that youth, women, and people with lower level post-secondary education are disproportionately hit during this pandemic to date. So we've got to take those things into account, and we've got to make sure that we are putting policies in place at the federal level, the state level and the local government level to try and provide stimulus to those sectors. We also know that some sectors are going to take longer to recover, and some may be permanently affected. So I'm of the opinion that as we stand up hospitality sector, people will go back to work. Retail could be different. You know, there are more people purchasing online. I think that there is a global disruption with regards to bricks and mortar retail. I think there probably will be a macro shift. I don't think it will be massive, but I think there will be a shift from bricks and mortar retail to more logistics hub where they're distributing product directly to consumers. So I think that that's sort of a trend that we need to be aware of. I think there's a general theme that we need to be aware of just around digital literacy, if that's a term. I don't know. May or may not, but you'll probably be able to. It is. Well, I just think that, I mean, I just take my mother, for example. She didn't know what email was. And she now, of course, is sending me emails with photos of people attached to them and all sorts of messages. So the silver lining is that we've become more digitally literate and aware, and we've got to think about, well, what are going to be the implications for business as part of this transformation? So, look, in summary, there's probably not one part of our economy which hasn't been affected. Some, if you're a toilet paper manufacturer, you've probably had a bit of a lift. We know groceries have done well, other retail affected negatively. I don't think there's anybody that is unaffected. What we've got to try to do, though, is to make sure that we can look at those areas, especially those areas with high levels of employment, and look at what we can be doing to support them, essentially over this bridge to what we have in Australia on the other side, recognising that we probably will never be 100% back to where we were, well, certainly not for some time.
No, that's exactly right. Thank you. So I think it's probably good to talk about tourism. Clearly it's a priority area, and I'm assuming that all of our participants today we're preaching to the converted, and they're getting good government information. The state government's sending out great updates all the time, and as is SATC. And I think one of the things that is really a great opportunity for us is to make regional travel aspirational. I did a piece of work recently and looked at some of the national travel and international travel, and over 11 million South Australians, sorry, we haven't got that many South Australians, travel outside of the country every year, and that's money, as you said, that it's just leaking directly out. So in terms of the making South Australian regional travel aspirational, I think that's a really important thing. And as I said, I live up in the mid-north, and driving in this morning, I think that every second vehicle on the road was a camper trailer heading out, which is exactly what we want to see. But from the government perspective, how is the South Australian government prioritising support for that sector now, and particularly in the longer term? Do you see any particular changes in that respect?
Yeah, look, a really good question. I took over as the Tourism Minister in January. I think they want to sack me because since then we've had these terrible bushfires and now the coronavirus. They must think I'm bad luck. I took over because I think this is a sector which we really do want to concentrate on here in South Australia. The visitor economy is strong and growing and employs a lot of people. So whilst a lot of sectors, the more efficient they become, the fewer people that they employ. The tourism sector, you can't really automate tourism.
It's a people business.
It's a people business, and that means it employs people, and it employs young people, and it employs people with really fulfilling employment. We know this really appeals to younger people that are leaving school, working out what they want to do to go into hospitality and tourism, the entertainment sectors. There's a lot of opportunity. We've put a focus on it since coming to government. We've been able to grow the sector. In December, we've got our final figures for last year. The sector was worth $8.1 billion, so very significant increases in the size of both employment and in terms of the turnover. It's broken into essentially three markets. There's the intrastate travel, the interstate travel, and the international travel. And for all the reasons that I outlined before, unfortunately, that international travel is going to be really curtailed over the next 6 months, maybe the next 12 months. And so that's tough, especially for those people who'd really built up their business on that international experience. But I would also echo the points that you made, and that is that South Australians actually spend more money overseas each year than the rest of the world spends in Adelaide each year. So whilst that international border is sort of in place, then there's an opportunity to go to a completely different market. So people that were ready to go up to Bali or go skiing in Japan or go off to Europe for their once-in-a-lifetime trip, they might be spending that money in regional South Australia or at a unique experience here in the CBD. And I think we've got to move very quickly to capture this market, because that will enable us to stand up a lot of jobs very quickly. It's one of the reasons why we were the first state to move on intrastate travel. So when Western Australia had 11 separate regions created and police borders stopping people moving around, we were opening up our borders in South Australia to intrastate travel and opening up for caravanning and camping. And we got that sort of leap on some of those other jurisdictions. The Welcome Back campaign has been phenomenally successful. In its first 2 weeks, which was really finished, I think, last week, or the first 2 weeks when I looked at those stats, showed 700,000 people had visited the website, and most of those, or the majority of those, from interstate. This is great news. This is absolutely great news, because as we open those state borders, people will be coming in and visiting destinations in South Australia. And often, as a substitute for overseas travel, those travellers have got more money to spend per night. And so one of the key messages that I've been saying to tourism operators in South Australia is don't undersell what you've got at the moment. Don't try and compete only at the lowest level price, but look at partnering with other people in your region to build up a package, a unique offering that people will pay a premium for, because I think the market is going to be for travel in South Australia is going to be much larger than it has been before. Yes, we're going to lose those international travellers for some time, but we will pick up those South Australians who are going overseas, and also those people interstate who are going overseas, coming over for some of our great products. So that's our approach. We will put more money into this sector because we know that it will create jobs. So it's part of our stimulus approach, but it's also part of just that overall approach. It's one of the key areas, the 8 key areas we've identified in our growth state strategy, the visitor economy. We want to grow this sector to more than $12.8 billion by 2030, and we know by doing this it's going to create 16,000 jobs. Yes, we've had a contraction for the first half of this year, but now we want that trajectory to increase going forward, and I feel very confident that we'll be able to achieve that.
Thank you. And yes, it's a demand opportunity we haven't had for a very long time. And particularly, again, putting my regional hat on, which I never let go, it's also really important for those smaller tourism assets in the area where we've always been a little under-dense in terms of the offering. And it's a chance for them to pick up with a bit of demand and actually grow their product so they're more competitive. So,
how's it going in the mid-north at the moment? Are you seeing increased visitation and increased bookings going forward?
I'm not particularly aware of the actual bookings, but the amount of holiday vehicles on the roads, considering it's not school holidays, is absolutely encouraging. I think one of the things that has been not necessarily translating into money in the pocket as much as we want is the thing that, as you acknowledge, the government's addressing, which is the number of people in hotels and restaurants and so on, and that's been a challenge. But the bottom line is they're out there. I mean, you know, literally I would have passed 200 or 300 on the way in this morning. They're just flooding out, which is just a marvellous opportunity for the state to capitalise on that. Because if we can get 6 months of active recognition of the value of our regions, hopefully some of that will stick when the international travel opens back up.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, you're right, the restrictions have been really hard on business, especially small business in tourism and customer-facing operations. 1 person per 4 square metres was just not economic. And so as we move to 1 per 2 square metres, we're really going to see a very significant increase in the number of people that can be in restaurants and cafes and clubs and pubs and just any organisations,
yes.
Quite frankly. So I think this is going to be a great opportunity. And look, in Queensland, they can still have a maximum of 20 people per room up there. And we've removed all of those restrictions. And I think that, you know, we've got an opportunity with our eased restrictions at the moment and the borders. We've opened our borders already to Western Australia, Northern Territory, Queensland, Tasmania. We're looking very closely at Broken Hill, the ACT, New South Wales more broadly, and Western Victoria. We are concerned about what's happening in Melbourne itself with some outbreaks there, and we've got to make sure that the Victorian government and the federal government are really locking down, just like we did in the Barossa, just like they did in northwest Tasmania. But I feel absolutely assured that they will get on top of those outbreaks and we can start to open up our economy more broadly.
Yes, great, thank you. Okay, we've probably given tourism a bit of a bashing, favourite topic of yours and mine. So can we talk perhaps a little bit about education and employment? And people have asked, how will the South Australian government support the Australian government's job maker policy, including improvements to the vet sector and workplace relations?
Well, certainly with regards to vet, South Australia is doing well. So since coming to government, we've put about $90 million back into the TAFE budget. And then in addition to that, we've put $200 million into new vocational education and training programs around apprenticeships and traineeships that are linked to a job. And the stats that came out from the NCVER only the week before last showed that in the December quarter, we were really the only jurisdiction that had a positive increase in the number of apprentices and traineeship commencements. Every other jurisdiction went backwards. And David Pisoni's done quite a lot of work in reforming the sector, looking at what we are supporting in terms of subsidised training lists. Setting up the industry skills boards again so that we are doing the type of training that we need to. Now, the Prime Minister recognised that vocational education and training was a concern for our nation. We had a continual deterioration, a spiral down in terms of the number of commencements and completions for apprenticeships. There were more and more people graduating to universities, and whilst I don't want to say anything negative about our fabulous universities in Australia, what I will say is we also need trade qualifications and other shorter courses and qualifications to meet the skills needs of the future. So the Prime Minister engaged Stephen Joyce, who was the former he held a range of economic and financial portfolios in the New Zealand government for a decade, and he did the Joyce review of VET that was received by COAG last year, and now we're working on the ways that we can improve that vocational education and training, provide those pathways to jobs, but also the pathways through to qualifications at universities. They've got to be further discussions with regards to job maker and industrial relations more broadly. What has happened in this COVID period up to the end of September is there have been allowances negotiated and agreed with regards to variations and flexibilities around the Fair Work Act. Now, these have been very helpful for employers, but I would emphasise employees as well in terms of providing that flexibility. We're going to have to work out where we want to go in terms of IR reform. I don't think these things happen very quickly. So whether or not there needs to be some bridge from the current arrangements to the new arrangements where there is increased flexibility. The thing that I'm pretty excited about is that there's goodwill. So you have Sally McManus out there saying we want to sit down with the government. You've got the Prime Minister saying we want to sit down with the unions. You've got employers and employees working things through themselves at the moment. Obviously, we don't want to diminish what employees have in terms of protections, but we also want to make sure that we maximise the number of people that are employed during this difficult period. So I think there's still discussions to be had. And as I said in the answer to an earlier question, the National Cabinet is considering, and the federal government is considering, what we do post the end of September when the job seeker and the job keeper arrangements come to an end. There's got to be some continuity. I don't think it will be just job seeker and job keeper continue. I think there are some issues with regards to just keeping those arrangements in place. They were both very good aggregate demand stimulus that we needed to have. The doubling of the arrangements with regards to the job seeker and that wage subsidy every fortnight for the job keeper. But we also need to recognise that we've got to move away from that sort of broad-based approach to more targeted and strategic and nuanced interventions. And so that's what the National Cabinet is considering at the moment. And on the 23rd of July, the Federal Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg, will be making an economic statement which will really give a clear picture of where we are as a nation this financial year, and then what the outlook is for next financial year. It is a tough time. We've delayed our budget. The federal government delayed their budget till October. We're delaying our state budget, and I think nearly every jurisdiction is doing exactly the same. We've delayed ours until November because we really don't have a clear picture of what the GST receipts are going to be, and also what's going to happen with regards to federal national partnership payments and specific purpose payments. So we've got to get a handle on that. We'll get some indication on the 23rd of July. We'll get more information in the October federal budget, and then we'll be able to frame our budget on the other side.
Fantastic. And of course there's, and I'm sure in everyone's thinking, those small business startups and the micro enterprises who didn't qualify for JobKeeper. And of course, you know, that's the very vulnerable stage of a business and its most employing stage quite often when it's quite new and hasn't had employees for a long time. Are there any particular thoughts that those sectors will have any assistance because they have largely missed out on the stimulus packages that have been available?
They've missed out on ours in South Australia because ours had a requirement that it basically had to be an organisation which had employees and had a wages bill of $70,000 a year up to 1.5. That was sort of the criteria that we set, which, by the way, I think was the most generous in the country. Just a bit of a plug for South Australia there.
Thank you for that.
But the federal stimulus in terms of JobKeeper was available to sole proprietors, so I thought that was actually good. Look, our focus is really on trying to keep as many people employed as possible and then to stimulate new activity. And so I know that these are things that we will continue to consider at the federal government level. At the state government level as well, you know, we've put in place reductions in payroll tax, reductions in land tax. We've been able to put deferrals in place for state government fees and charges that would normally come into place. Some we've just waived completely, some we've deferred. We've been able to negotiate at the federal government, at the National Cabinet level with the banks for deferrals of payments, and also I think appropriate arrangements post the end of that deferral, so that it doesn't all the money, interest and repayments that were due during that period become payable on the day that it's lifted, but that they are spread over the remainder of the term of the loan. So I think that was a good arrangement. We've also been able to, at the National Cabinet, put in place a framework for negotiating leasing arrangements between landlords and tenants. And again, I've just been so overwhelmed and proud, actually, that South Australia hasn't let this become a real source of ongoing stress and friction. Landlords and tenants sat down together. Landlords want to keep good tenants in place. Tenants want to have those arrangements put in place. We put some protections into state government legislation that give some protection to tenants in South Australia so that they can't be turfed out during this very difficult period. But by and large, do you know what's happened? Landlords and tenants have sat down. They've looked at the framework, if you like, that we put in place regarding deferrals and waivers. They've worked it out themselves. We've had very, very few requests for mediation at the Small Business Commissioner level. We're talking, I think the last time I looked, it was less than 50 across the entire state. Now, I've got to tell you, I was thinking this could be 50,000 disputes.
Yeah, the Commissioner would be happy too.
He's relieved. But and look, it's not to say that there won't be disputes, but by and large, people have sat down and they've said, okay, what's a fair deal? This is what the government has said. It looks like if you're down 70%, well, then you should have relief of 70% from your landlord. 35% of that would be a waiver. 35% of that would be a deferral. Most people have used that as a starting point. They've adjusted it for their specific situation and they've gone from there. I've been really impressed.
Thank you. Well, I think we're just about out of time, Premier. I think you need to leave in a minute or two. Any famous last words?
Oh, famous last words. Just a massive thank you to the people of South Australia. We're really fortunate in South Australia to have this really good relationship, I think, between governments and people. We've been really well led by Professor Nicola Spurrier, the Chief Public Health Officer in South Australia, and her team. Absolutely outstanding. Dr. Louise Flood, who's the head of the Communicable Diseases Control Branch. She's over in Victoria at the moment, helping them out. Dr. Tom Dodd, who's the head of SA Pathology. Dr. Chris McGowan, who's the head of SA Health. Stephen Wade, who's the Minister for Health and Wellbeing in South Australia. I've also got to single out and acknowledge and thank the Commissioner for Police, Grant Stevens, who's also the state coordinator during this major emergency declaration. He and our police officers have done an amazing job, not trying to impose heavy restrictions. We've had the lowest level of restrictions in the country and the highest level of observance, and I think that's because of that relationship that we have. We've had great support from our teachers to get our kids back to school, and so I want to thank our parents and our principals and our teachers and our support workers in schools. I want to thank the private sector, the businesses, many of whom are on this webinar today, for the faith that they've shown. These have been tough times. Many of them have said, it's a tough time, but I'm not going to be defeated. In fact, what I'm going to do is to use this as a way to make our business stronger than before, and look for ways that they can embrace digitisation, how they can look at product development during this time, and not be a waste of time where we just crawl across the line, but a time where we come out stronger than before. So I couldn't be prouder of my state and the way that we've all been able to work together. There will be some very tough times ahead, but I think by working together we put ourselves in the best position. And where else would you want to be in the world at the moment than Australia, and more particularly here in South Australia? Where else? Because I still look at those stats. The US yesterday had their third highest day ever in terms of new infections. It's back on the rise. The world had 150,000 new infections on Saturday morning. I'm too scared to look at it on a daily basis anymore, but 150,000 new infections, you know, it's a frightening situation. So we've done it well. We should enjoy some of the easing of the restrictions next week, and then just reapply ourselves to see how we can support each other and keep growing our economy and growing the number of people employed.
Thank you, and thank you so much for your time. It really appreciate the chat format. I think people have had a great opportunity. We probably didn't get through everyone's questions, so apologies if you had a tricky one in there and we didn't cover it, but we're pretty keen to be able to talk broadly across everything. So thank you, Prember. We understand if you need to go, that's fine. And in closing, in the last couple of minutes, I'd just like to do a shameless plug for the Adelaide Business Hub. I hope everyone enjoyed their annual business lunch. We'll have ours afterwards. Reminding people about the COVID-19 business recovery program. We received extra funds, federal government funds for that, and it's very much focused on digital. So if you and your colleagues have a business that hasn't got an up-to-date website that you can't pre-book, because that's how you're going to make your money, and if you have to have forms filled in as part of your COVID plan, get it all up front on your website, and our $55 business recovery digital solutions can help with that. So get in touch if that's something you would like. Don't forget there's the helpline, COVID-19 recovery links. And in closing, I'd like to thank the Premier and Government of South Australia, but also, of course, our marvellous partners, the City of Port Adelaide Enfield. And thank you again for Mayor Clarebone for doing the introductory statements, and we're excited to see the great recovery response from the City of Port Adelaide Enfield. So thank you, everyone, and I hope you enjoyed your lunch. Bye.